Warhammer Underworlds has done it, Kill Team has done it, and I've got to mention them second because every time you mention Kill Team and WARCRY in the same sentence, I seem to get attacked, which means that today we will be talking about rotation and set rotation in general when comparing it to WARCRY. I've heard all of the arguments for and against, people on one side of the fence saying, oh, we do not want rotation because the barrier to entry to the game is extremely low. You can basically play whatever you want. I've got a massive amount of creativity when building my warbands. But on the other side of the fence, you have people say you need rotation because the bloat that exists in Games Workshop games has just got too large, the game is too big, and it needs to be trimmed down for the sake of balance. In a previous life, I would have been heavily in the former camp, but now I'm finding myself more and more pro the idea of rotation, or at least a shift towards a legend-style method of list building, something like Warhammer 40k, something like Age of Sigmar. I think it'd be overly positive for the game, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about rotation. I'm going to lay out my arguments why I think that overall this is a direction that Games Workshop should go in when it comes to WARCRY, and why I think that should happen. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, what you think about rotation, cutting down on the amount of available fighters that there are. That's something that I would really like to hear. If you want to put that down in the comments, I will be very happy to have a conversation with you about it. First, I'm going to throw some numbers at the screen. Warhammer Underworlds, they used to have 58 legal teams. That's being cut all the way down to 33, and they're going to be rotating teams in and out as the seasons progress. Kill Team, pre-3rd edition, they used to have 60 legal teams, including Compendium. That's been chopped down to, again, 33 in this edition. 14 of the older teams are going to be rotating out during a year, but new teams are going to be added periodically as their release cycle allows. WARCRY is a different beast altogether. There are currently 67 legal teams, including all of the different Stormcast flavors, all of the different cities of Sigmar. All of the 58 old Warhammer Underworld teams are legal. There are over 1,300 profiles, and this isn't including the most recent Warhammer Underworlds warbands. The profile roster only gets bigger as more Age of Sigmar and Underworld stuff is released. So you can see from a balance standpoint and just from a management standpoint, this can get extremely unwieldy. That's why I think Games Workshop really needs to step up and do something about it. The first thing they should do is slim down the Compendium. I'm going to use Slaves to Darkness as an example. If we take Chaos Warriors, your basic Chaos Warrior has effectively 4 builds. You've got double hand weapon, you've got single hand weapon and shield, you've got spear and shield, and you have great weapon. The problem is that in Age of Sigmar and in the box itself, you can't actually build half of those profiles anymore. You don't get great weapons anymore. You can't do double hand weapons anymore with your Chaos Warriors. So effectively out of the box, you're really left with 2 builds. Considering that one of the biggest routes into WARCRY is actually existing Age of Sigmar players, and the push in recent years in Age of Sigmar, you see it with Spearhead, and you see it with the most recent version, is that they have a number of unified profiles where players are not being penalized for how they want to build their guys. You can build your guys however you want, and in game they all have one profile and you can use them so you build your guys basically as they are. They've done this in Warhammer 40k also. If we check out Space Marines and we check out all of those factions, previously they would have had all the different special weapons under the sun: Flamer, Melter Gun, Storm Bolter, Power Weapon, Power Fist, all of the different flavors, all of everything, all with their own special rules. And now they've cut them down where your unit basically has one weapon type that has all of the special rules, and you pick and choose depending on what you want to do. So that's where I really think that the Compendium would benefit massively from an overall slimming down of those existing units that either you can't buy anymore or that you can't make in a box. It makes things more approachable from an Age of Sigmar standpoint. It reduces the likelihood of there being one weapon profile or one build that's head and shoulders above the rest that you can't actually buy and you can't actually build from your existing Age of Sigmar collection. This issue is compounded by Games Workshop continually adding new Age of Sigmar models and new factions entirely. If we check out Dark Oath, for example, they finally got their own faction. But what we have now in Slaves to Darkness is that there are 9 Dark Oath profiles, all with old models. None of the old Marauder with flail profiles, basically you can't build out of the new Marauder set. You've got all of the old mounted models, again with no models that you can actually buy. This adds to the amount of bloat in the faction, whereby there's a whole bunch of stuff that if you want to play them in your Slaves to Darkness warbands, you either have to convert or you have to buy the models from elsewhere. It's not as easily available and as easy a step-on point for those Age of Sigmar players and for Warcry players in general if you want to get into the game to say, all right, I can buy this box and it has the models that I want to use. And of course, they did this already. They've totally done this. They've done this with the new Stormcast Liberators that were just updated in the September FAQ. They merged the Liberator with Warblade and Sigmarite Shield and all the great weapons and all of those profiles, basically smashed them together in a bunch of brand new profiles. And what these do is more accurately reflect the actual models that you are able to buy. What they didn't do, however, is get rid of any of the old profiles. Instead, they just added these new Liberators into Thunderstrike. The old Warrior Liberators are still there. Now, this means that effectively we have several different kinds of Liberators with different remarks in different factions, with different abilities and different profiles, but with the same name as Liberator. If I'm a new player getting into the game and my opponent comes across from me and says, all right, I've got Liberators, you basically have to say, okay, which Liberators are we talking about? Are they these Liberators, that Liberators? Oh, I can't use these old Liberators because I can't buy them anymore. There are profiles that I can't use anymore because they don't exist, and these models might be really hard to come by. Games Workshop themselves only seem to remove profiles if there are new miniatures that directly replace the old ones. So I'm thinking about Rat Ogres, for example. We got new Rat Ogres in the most recent Age of Sigmar set. They replace the old Rat Ogres. But I do think that they should go further and consolidate a lot of these profiles together and make it so that the Compendium teams themselves aren't as bloated as they are today. The other really good example for this is Iron Jaws. They got rid of all of the old Ard Boys, put in all new profiles for Ard Boys, consolidated a lot of those profiles into one, and now what we have is a much more cohesive faction with its own direction and playstyle that can't just kind of do everything just by virtue of having old models or having access to new models, old models at the same time. When talking about rotation or something like a Legends format, one of the things that really come to mind is addressing stuff that you cannot actually buy anymore from Games Workshop. Not just all of those old builds that we've just been talking about, but there are entire model ranges and entire warbands and entire factions that have effectively been removed that you can't go onto Games Workshop's website and buy anymore. For me, it's really, really important that players who want to get into the game itself should not have to resort to going onto eBay and paying eBay prices, effectively making the game pay to win. I personally think that the update of all of those old Bladeborn points costs, I think that was a mistake. Games Workshop should have just left them and let them fade off into obscurity, but they kind of updated them. This is an issue because if we are going from 58 down to 33 Bladeborn warbands, those remaining 25, you just won't be able to buy anywhere. Guys, watch time from subscribers, 47%. What's going on? We're slacking. But to the rest of you, let's go. You can hit that subscribe button, costs you absolutely nothing, and we can continue to make more videos like the one you're watching now. If you want to throw some more support my way, you can join me over on YouTube. You can join me on Patreon. Join me over on Streamlabs. Either way, you get to see new stuff. You get to see stuff before it's released, and you get to have a bit of a say into the kind of stuff I am doing now. But with that being said, let's get back to the video. Now, when I'm talking about current fighters that you can't buy anymore, of course, the 25 Underworld teams that we've already talked about, there are 10 bespoke warbands that back in April Games Workshop ceased production on. You've got all of the old Dark Oath profiles and Slaves to Darkness, all of Bone Splitters, all of Beastmen, Stormcast Eternal Sacrosanct chapter that they don't sell anymore. Most of the old Stormcast Eternals Warrior Chamber. There are several Seraphon builds that you can't buy, and the list goes on and on and on. All of these profiles are effectively either don't need to be in the game or don't need to be match play legal. If you want to move them to Legends and you want to play in a casual sense, that's fine. But I do think that from a game management standpoint and from a balance standpoint, we have to look at some way to trim down those 1300 profiles, make the game a whole lot tighter, and make it so that there is less of this huge gap between Bladeborn warbands and Compendium warbands in just the amount of stuff that you can bring. And this eventually becomes an issue for match play. You get the situation where you've got, and let's take Bladeborn warbands as an example, where you have old Bladeborn warbands that have just been updated in terms of point costs that you physically cannot buy anymore, and those fighters might be better or they might have other things going for them that end up making them very effective in match play, especially compared to the existing fighters out there. One of the models that comes to mind when thinking about this is the Saurus Scar Veteran on Old One. It's popped up in several events now and in several topping lists. Basically, 215 points. You can't buy them anymore because the entire Cold One range has been phased out for favor of the new Agrodons. But effectively, what it is the most easily available version of Tearing Bite on the fastest body with more wounds than the second nearest thing. It's about 20 points cheaper than the closest Agrodon equivalent, and this is a problem. When you have older profiles that are better than the newer models, and ultimately Games Workshop wants people to be using the new models as opposed to using 25, 30-year-old sculpts, this is an issue. And I think that if you can't buy it anymore and it's completely discontinued, which is the case of these Cold Ones, Games Workshop should just get rid of them completely. With all of this in mind, what am I actually calling for? I think that going whole hog rotation and just saying, okay, you can't use your models anymore. These are the models that you can't use. I'm sorry, they're gone. I think that would be a mistake because I think that would foster more negative will with players than the positive effects would be in game. I think maintaining some sort of a Legends compendium where you can say, all right, all of this old stuff that you used to have, we're going to put it into Legends. You can continue playing it in a casual sense, but for match play, we're not going to be using them anymore because it's not widely available for people to actually buy and use. I think that would be a positive step. The things that go into Legends, I would look specifically at the stuff that you cannot buy anymore, anything that ceased production, all of these old profiles that have been superseded by new models in all of the new factions. I think that's something that should be in there. Any old profiles that you cannot build with existing box sets, I think all of that should go in there. And what that will do, after crunching the numbers, that will probably reduce the amount of actual profiles that Games Workshop has to balance by about a half. And that's still a lot of profiles in the game, right? We're talking somewhere around 600 to 700 profiles. So that's still a lot of stuff. There will still be something like 45 or 50 factions in the game for people to actually play. But with a lot of these older profiles merged into one, I think we'll have a much cleaner and much tighter roster of fighters, and it will overall be easier for Games Workshop to manage, and it will be a lot easier for players to get into the game, either existing players of Age of Sigmar or players who want to get into WARCRY just as their first wargame. And I do understand the arguments that are saying if you go down the road of rotation, it's basically a slippery slope, and what you effectively end up in is kill team style building. But I don't think that's necessarily a valid argument because ultimately Games Workshop decides what kind of list building we have and we don't have. I'm not saying that we should go to a bespoke only format. I'm saying that we should have a game that's a lot cleaner and more easy to manage. I think on a side point, it will also give Warcry a lot more credibility. I don't want to say serious game because ultimately it is a casual game at heart. That's how it was designed and that's how it's pushed onto people. But from a balance standpoint, it makes the perception of Warcry to be a much more balanced game because suddenly you don't have all of these profiles. An outsider could look in and say, well, I can't buy these models don't exist. These are the best things, but I can't buy them. So what kind of a game is this? You avoid all of that, and I think it gives Warcry a lot more credibility overall. Okay, and that's it for today. Thank you very much for watching. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, what you think about rotation, cutting down on the amount of available fighters that there are. That's something that I would really like to hear. If you want to put that down in the comments, I will be very happy to have a conversation with you about it. As always, if you like what you see, please don't forget to like and subscribe. As always, I've been Itan, this has been Musings, and we will see you next time.